let's get into the fourth quadrant of emotional intelligence. And this finishes out our series where what we're doing is we're comparing these two books, Emotional Intelligence, which most people have already read or learned about. I highly recommend adding that to your collection if you don't have it, and The Leadership Space. And so what I said earlier on in this series is that by practicing the principles of the leadership space, you will naturally gain complete mastery of emotional intelligence. I mean, I really mean it because I can see it. I can see it in myself. I can see it in students of mine that have practiced the principles of leadership space. You're naturally going to become competent, if not masterful, in using the four quadrants of emotional intelligence, which, let's take a look. What are they? Self-awareness, becoming the observer of your inner world. Self-regulation, being able to regulate and control your inner world, your perception filter, or your interpretation filter, we called it, so that you can regulate your own emotions and therefore your own reactions and your own response. Why does it matter? Well, so that you can ultimately connect with other people and influence them, right? So to the third quadrant, other awareness, being aware of what other people are dealing with and going through, their emotional state, their experience, their psychology, and then being able to connect with them and influence them, which is ultimately the purpose of emotional intelligence, right? Like, what was the purpose? So for all these, how many years have we talked about IQ as like the supreme thing? And it does matter, high IQ is an indicator of success. If you have a high IQ, it's usually true that you will have a greater propensity for success, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have a greater capacity in relationships, because that's a different intelligence. That's emotional intelligence. And so, of course, this whole, all of the literature on emotional intelligence has made a big difference in our world because it's about connecting with people. So let's bring all this together now, right? How do we influence others? And how do all these quadrants work together? And how does the principles of the leadership space help you do it, right? Let's finish it. So other influence. Let's take a look at, well, what do you mean other influence? Like, what are we influencing? Fundamentally, number one, communication. How can you be more effective in communication? How can you use the tools of emotional intelligence and the leadership space to be better at communication? And I'll go into it in just a moment. What about in being persuasive? How can you be more persuasive with others? What about conflict resolution? How can you be more effective in resolving conflict? Let me just write it a little different here. Okay. What about in creating teamwork, right? How can you be effective in creating excellent teamwork? What about in your leadership overall? What about in being able to cause outcomes through other people? That's what leadership ultimately is. You're causing outcomes through other people. So how does this work? Well, other influence ultimately is the fact that you have gotten other people to trust you, to connect with you, to want to listen to you. They actually want to hear what you have to say. Like, how are you going to influence someone if they don't even want to hear what you have to say? I mean, influence is very different than coercion, right? So in an authoritarian model of leadership, maybe in the military, the other person has to listen. They don't have a choice. So you tell them what to do. And if they don't do it, there's consequences, right? We're not dealing with an authoritarian model of leadership, right? The leadership space is kind of like a servant transformational leadership style or approach. You're dealing with leading through influence, which has come up many times in different seminars or in different coaching contexts or conversations with students. They always come to me and say, how do I lead through influence? Like, when I don't have the ability to hire or fire or give people a bonus, like, how do I lead through influence? Well, this is how you do it. Right? Ultimately, if you want to lead through influence, people have to trust you. They have to want to connect to you. They have to want to go where you're going. They have to know that them following you is actually in their best interest, right? So if you take a step back, take a deep step back, and we look at the fundamental principles of leadership space, like, what are they? The three principles to elevate your team, your success, and your satisfaction. What are the three principles? We've talked about it in other videos, but it's really relevant here, right? So choice, context, contribution. Okay? And they're all really relevant, but what of the three do you think would be most relevant to influencing others? Think about it. What do you think would be the most relevant? I mean, you really can say all of them, right? But in my view, contribution is probably the most relevant because that's where you are standing as a leader to benefit others. You exist that they win. Like, think about it this way. If you're thinking about other people from what they can do for you and how they are working for you, that's not really coming from contribution. That's not coming from a servant transformational leadership style. That's not the leadership space. That's basically, a coercive type of leadership. And I'm not putting management down. Management has its place, but management is often thinking, look, you work for me, do your job. That's not very influential. You need to be able to, coerce people to do things, and usually can because management is in control of salaries and things like that. I get that. Okay. We're talking about leadership, which is the power to influence others without coercion. So when you put yourself in a contribution mindset, you're always thinking about how does the other person win because I'm here. You're always thinking about they don't work for me. The team's not working for me, I'm working for them. And when you do that by the law of reciprocity, people naturally want to be on your team. People naturally want to hear what you have to say. People naturally want to go the direction you're going because it's going to benefit them. So that's the background of everything, is a contribution mindset or contribution consciousness, okay? Now, looking at everything else, looking at everything else, right? When you consider the power of choice, the power of context, when you are when you're practicing choosing who you want to be in the world, bringing an empowering context, what's the opportunity here? Where's the learning experience? Where can I be a contribution? You're naturally going to be able to be aware and regulate yourself. You're naturally going to be in the other person's space, which gives you the power to connect, okay? That brings you to the power to influence. So look at communication, for example. And there's a whole series of videos on my channel about communication. So you can go much deeper through those. But just look at the word communication. Look at it. What is the root word of communication? Right? And why is this relevant? Let's look. What is the root word of communication? The root word is to commune. Right? To commune. And what does it mean to commune? To commune means to connect. Right? It means to connect. The word should really be connectication. Right? Because think about it this way. In communication, the purpose is to get the message across to the other person so that they receive it and can work with it, right? And do something or respond to it or be influenced by it. So the key to communication is not what the speaker is saying, it's what the listener is hearing. Okay, so to influence others, you first got to really get into their world. You got to get into their space, into their mindset. And so by practicing everything I've been teaching you, you're naturally going to connect with other people because you're in their world. You're paying attention to them. You're making a difference for them from who you're being. And so you'll naturally see that your communication is smoother. People pick up on your ideas. They understand you because there's less resistance. They're not trying to defend themselves. They're not trying to make sure you're not trying to push them this way. No, they want to listen. And so that collaboration becomes natural. Okay, I don't have trust here, but trust is part of communication. And you'll see in the other videos on trust on the channel that trust is really about making the other person feel safe. Trust is about safety. If you want to influence someone, they have to let you in, right? So they got to feel trust with you. What does it mean to feel trust? Is that they feel safe. Why do they feel safe? Well, because you're there to be a contribution to them. You want them to win in your space. You're a leader, a real leader. Leaders want other people to win because when the teammate wins, the leader wins. And that's fundamental, okay? This is all background. It's who you're being. Who you're being leads to what you're doing. And if you're doing communication well, it's because you're being connected. Do a little deeper dive in the video series on communication on the channel. All right, what about being persuasive? Well, persuasion is ultimately about the other person seeing your point of view. I mean, you want to know the fastest way that other people see your point of view? Think about it from where I'm going with all this. What would be the fastest way that the other person sees from your point of view? Right? It would be that you've exhibited that you saw their point of view. Right? So let's say you're having a conversation with a teammate and you're trying to persuade them to go this way versus that. Or maybe you're having a conversation with your boss or with a board of directors or something, people that are going to make a decision that are higher level than you. The first thing to do is to get into their world, to understand their language, to understand their concerns, to understand what they're worried about or what they're listening for, and to address those points. So it's not, being persuasive is not about being powerful and being, sort of boisterous in the way that you're communicating or that you're the smartest person in the room. No, it's that you understand the other person's concerns. You understand what the other person is thinking, and you address it so that they trust you because they know you're already thinking on their page. From thinking on their page, now you can deliver information that is going to take them in a direction that you want them to go because they already know you have addressed what they were worried about. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Fundamentally, it's about being for the other person. And then, obviously, important things involve the facts, having a command of the facts, having a command of the nuance, having an understanding of consequences, having an understanding of how things work and why things will work or why things won't. And when people are listening to you because they feel safe, now you can say, you know what, if we go down this path, these are the concerns I have. And now they're listening to your concerns because you exhibited that you were listening to their concerns. And so now you can say, I really recommend we go down this path because the outcome here is not certain. This is far more certain. It's far more profitable. And fundamentally, there's less risk. I definitely think this is the way to go. And then you can pause for a moment. Because you have been being connected to others, you have been being a contribution, and you've exhibited an understanding of their concerns, you're much more persuasive. And so you add on all the value or the intelligence or the positive attributes to where you want to go, well, then it makes perfect sense because there's no resistance. This is very important. Now, certainly we can do more depth, but this is the basic idea. Are you catching the theme of what I'm saying? Conflict resolution. There's a great book out there, and I'm going to do a series on that at some point too, called, what is it called? Crucial Conversations. You remember this book? And Crucial Conversations is fundamentally about dissolving conflict. And what does that book say at its root, at its core? Right? It talks about creating a pool of shared meaning where both sides understand each other, where they're talking the same language, they're understanding the same concepts, they're understanding the same problems. Like, what do you see in what I'm saying? Right? You're seeing that people are on the same page, and how do they get there? Well, Crucial Conversation says that you first have to put yourself in the right state. That book talks about actually dealing with your own internal stories. So you don't come into a circumstance with this background. They don't use these terms. I use these terms in the leadership space, but that there's a filter you bring into every interaction. And if you have a judgment, a story, and a point of view that's like the other person's wrong, that's why there's a problem. The reason we have a problem is because the other person's stupid. The reason we have a problem is because the other person is wrong. When you come into the interaction, you're not communicating. You're not connected. Why? Because there's a wall up between you and the other person. You know what the wall is? It's your judgment that they suck, basically. And they feel it, and they're not going to give you an inch. Why should they? Because if they let you win, that means they suck because your opinion won. You don't do that. You resolve that story. You clear your filter. You get present to the other person's value, bring fundamental respect, bring a fundamental connection, bring a deep empathic listening. We covered that in the video on other awareness. And when you do that, all of a sudden now you're on the same page, two equals looking at each other, looking at the same stuff, working toward the same goal with mutual respect, with a mutual desire, and you're going to accomplish a resolution because there's less resistance because you've practiced the being of leadership, which is that you've chosen the context of contribution. Like, it's actually really powerful. I've seen it happen over and over and over. As a lawyer, I've seen it. As a teacher, I've seen it. As a human being in relationships, I've seen it. It really does work, and it's powerful. And then before I lose my voice, let me wrap up. So teamwork and leadership. Ultimately, teamwork is really about people wanting to be accountable to each other to achieve a common goal. Your goal as a leader with teamwork is not to push your team. It's to have your team actually be inspired and connected enough to where they want to be self-accountable. They want to hold each other accountable, self-accountable teams, and they actually want to get to where you want them to go as a leader. That's what you want to create. That's the level of influence you want to have. And you will achieve that level of influence if you practice the leadership space. Fundamentally, choosing the context of contribution and setting up frameworks for conversation that lets people be safe, that has people feel connected, that gets people focused and concentrated so that your presence has others elevate to their best ability. That's the leader you want to be. And by practicing these tools and techniques, you can be that leader. That's my promise to you. See you in the next series.